honored to have Mr. Ajay Avasthi and Mr. Ashwari Vikram as our esteemed speaker. Thank you all for joining us today in this lecture class. Mr. Ajay Avasthi is an advocate practicing in the chambers of Mr. Mahesh Jethmalani. His practice focuses on advising on constitutional law, NPO laws in India, criminal law, service law, electricity law, and arbitration matters. He has a work experience of more than 6 years in the good offices of Mr. Ram Jethmalani and Mr. P.H. Parekh before joining the offices of Mr. Mahesh Jethmalani. He is an impaneled advocate with Madhya Pradesh Paschim Kshetra Vidyut Vitran Co. Limited before the Supreme Court of India. Mr. Vikram is an advocate practicing in the chambers of Mr. Amit Sibal. He is a counsel practicing in Delhi. His areas of expertise is in the field of constitutional law, land acquisition, arbitration, intellectual property rights, insolvency and bankruptcy law, law against sexual harassment, consumer protection law. In the past, he has been in association with Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas, a reputed firm with offices across India. He is currently working with Mr. Amit Sibal, senior advocate, and has assisted him in a wide variety of matters. Along with his professional commitments, he has a keen interest in academics. He has various publications in reputed journals, such as in Niti Aayog Journal of Law and Policy and International Journal of Commerce and Social Sciences. At present, he is also editor and on the advisory board of 2 reputed journals on law and policy and transitional commercial laws. Today's lecture class is on law and procedure on section 156(3) CRPC when police does not register FIR. This class is organized by LegitQuest, which is an artificial intelligence-based legal research product. It is a state-of-the-art legal research platform for conducting legal research and is very well known for the introduction of the world's only one-click insight system called the iDRAF Case Analytics. In short, the iDRAF feature, powered by artificial intelligence, takes out the issue, facts, arguments, reasoning, and decision of a case law. LegitQuest recently has also started with LegitEye, which is latest news, interviews, and columns, and serves the stakeholders of judiciary. Our today's session will be for 45 minutes, followed by a Q&A session. I would request all our participants to be on mute and without video throughout the call, and all questions to the speakers can be written in the chat box, which will be taken at the end of the session if the time permits. Now, we just got to know that Mr. Avasthi is having some net issue, so in case it gets resolved, he might be able to join us later. And in case he does, we'll add him. I would now hand over it to Mr. Vikram. So please.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and I'm honored to be on this platform to interact with you all. Now, before we start to show the steps and the procedure to be followed when a police officer does not register an FIR, we should also see what is an FIR, what information cannot be used as an FIR or cannot be communicated to the police officer, or the police officer may not record it as an FIR. Why registration of FIR is other ancillary aspects related to FIR. Now, as we all know, FIR is a first information report which is prepared by the police officer on the communication made by any person regarding the commission of a cognizable offense. Now, this is important because it kickstarts the investigation, and this is the first information that is given to the police officer. That's why it is known as first information report. It may not be necessary. Always a first information given to the police officer may not be considered as an FIR, but usually it happens. Now, FIR is only registered regarding cognizable offenses. Now, what is a cognizable offense? That is defined under section 2C. 2C says that where the police officer has a power to arrest a person without warrant, that is a cognizable offense. 2L on the other hand side says where the police officer cannot arrest a person without a warrant, that is non-cognizable offense. Now, when we read these with section 156 and 155, we see that under section 155 for non-cognizable offense, a consent of the magistrate is required. And under 156, there's no such order or consent required from a magistrate. The police can take cognizance and can investigate the crime. Now, you will see that the scheme of section 155 to 157, there are two concepts involved. One is power, the second one is procedure. Now, section 155 for non-cognizable offense gives power to the police officer with the consent of the magistrate. Section 156 give her to take cognizance. 157 on the other hand provides the procedure for investigation. Now, if it is a non-cognizable offense, 155 will be read with 157. If it is a cognizable offense, 156 will be read with 157. Now, that is the limited aspect of power and procedure that is involved. Now, what are the essential things that are required and mandated by section 154 while the registration of the FIR is done are 4 in number. The first one is that when the informant gives a oral as well as written communication, that has to be reduced in writing by the police officer. The second thing is that the written information has to be reduced in a FIR book. The third thing is that the written information has to be read out to the informant. Fourth, that it has to be signed by the informant. Now, 1973 the 1973 CRPC specifically provides that a FIR copy has to be given to the informant. These are safeguards, and you will see that it is the 1973 safeguards that provides these particular safeguards. Earlier CRPC never provided for the same, or they were few in number as compared to the safeguards provided under 1973 Act. Also, you will also notice that under section 155, there are 2 words used. One is case, second is offense. Now, both are used interchangeably, so there's a confusion as to what is a case and what is an offense. Now, offense is any act that is punishable under law, which is defined under the IPC. Whereas what is case is that offenses together or individually becomes a case when the police officer registers an FIR, or a complaint is filed before the magistrate, or the magistrate on the information provided by the informant takes cognizance. Then only the word case is used. Otherwise, it is always the word offense that is used. Now, coming to the next thing, you will notice that there are few informations that are held to be not an FIR, and there's a reason for that. If you call on 100 number reporting a particular offense, you seek assistance of a police patrol vehicle or police chowki, orally inform a police officer regarding the commission of a cognizable offense with no intention of registering a FIR, or cryptic information to the police officer about the commission of the FIR, about the commission of an offense, such type of informations are not considered as an FIR. Now, there's a reason to it. And the reason is that in a trial, the prosecution wants to use a FIR. Now, supposedly, A commits an offense, and the offense is committed. A call is made to the police officer by a stranger. He says that I have seen a commission of an offense. The police officer reaches the spot, takes the particular details from the victim, records an FIR. Now, what will you say? Because the first information regarding the commission of the offense was given to the police officer by that stranger. Now, if you consider that as an FIR, then the difficulty will be that by section 162 of CRPC, all statements made during investigation cannot be used during trial. So if the later statement that is made by the victim disclosing the offense, the name of the accused, as well as other surrounding circumstances cannot be used, because it is a statement made during the investigation and it is barred by section 162 of CRPC. So in order to overcome this, the Supreme Court in a series of judgments have held that FIR is an information given by the informant showing the commission of a cognizable offense. If an information is cryptic in nature, or if it does not discloses the commission of a cognizable offense, the same cannot be treated as an FIR. Now, then the question comes, who can lodge an FIR? Many will say that only a complainant can lodge an FIR. The answer is not that. A complainant can lodge an FIR, means a person who is the victim himself can lodge an FIR. A stranger can also lodge an FIR if he gives correct, true details regarding the commission of the offense, means he shows to the police officer that a cognizable offense was committed. Even an accused can lodge an FIR. A police officer himself can lodge an FIR. So it is any person who can lodge an FIR, And it is not a straightforward jacketed formula that only a victim of a crime can lodge an FIR. That is not the case. Now, if we see the legislative history of the various of the provisions on FIR, as was there in the earlier CRPCs, you will find a big change as well as also various safeguards that have been added by legislative wisdom. Now, let's come to first the Criminal Procedure Code of 1861. Now, it only provided, the 1861 code only provided that every complaint or information preferred to officer in charge of a police station shall be reduced in writing, and the substance thereof shall be entered in a diary to be kept by the police officer in such form as may be prescribed by the local government. Similarly, 1872 provided the same thing. However, now these things are not provided. See the two difference that has now been brought by the legislature. Number one, the word complaint or information, the word complaint has been omitted. It is information now. Why? What's the reason behind this? The reason is that complaint was a little formal, wherein a victim could have made a complaint, whereas information can be made by anyone. And that is why the word information has now been retained under the present section 154 instead of the word complaint. The second difference that you will find is that the word book was used. The word diary was used earlier. Now, diary means usually a general diary that is kept in the police station. This word diary was removed and the word book was added, which is a special FIR book wherein FIRs are lodged. Now, this particular book has numbers so that the government as well as the higher authorities can keep a check whether when the FIR was registered, what was the name of what was the number of the FIR, whether the FIR is genuine or not, and the possibility of making changes later becomes quite remote when you record an FIR in form of a book. You will also notice that these two particular sections does not provide it for signing of the FIR or for giving a copy to the informant. This was only later that was introduced by the legislature. Why was this done? So that police officers at a later point of time cannot make changes to the FIR that is lodged by a person. And also so that the person has a copy of the FIR with him. Now, you will also see later in 1882 and the 1898 CRPCs that were enacted, you will see that these two particular CRPCs clearly provided that the signing of the FIR is mandatory by a person, which is still retained by the 1973 CRPC. Now, but again, these CRPCs were good, but they were not exhaustive. The procedure was not quite detailed. There were few lacunas involved. And precisely because of this reason, the legislator thought it fit to enact the 1973 CRPC. Now, if you see before the 1973 CRPCs, there were two Law Commission reports that were made. One was the 37th Law Commission report, and the second was the 41st Law Commission report. Both are relevant, and I'll tell you why. 37th Law Commission report is relevant because it shows us an oxymoron picture of the state of UP. Because it was the government of UP which proposed an amendment in that existing section 154, saying that lodging of FIR should be the job of superintendent of police, and as the junior members of the police, such as the police in charge of the police station, can conceal the information, can minimize the information, can demand money for the lodging of FIR. So it is only the superintendent of police whom should be given the power. Now, interestingly, this very state of UP that made this suggestion, though it was not accepted, it is the same state of UP in Lalita versus state of UP, wherein state of UP did not register an FIR and a person had to go to Supreme Court under Article 32 to get his FIR registered. Now, this is an irony here in the 37th Law Commission report. Now, another thing that comes to our mind is the 41st Law Commission report, which is the most important and crucial report because it provides one additional safeguard which is provided only and exclusively under the 1973 CRPC and not the earlier CRPCs. That is, that when you register a FIR, you have to give a copy to the complainant. This was not in the earlier enactments. It was only by the 41st Law Commission report of 1969 that this safeguard was added. Now, by this manner, we appreciate how and what safeguards are there under the CRPC regarding registration of an FIR under section 154. In 2013, an incident happened. That is the Nirvaya's case. After that, there was an amendment that was brought to CRPC, wherein all women-related crimes and other form of crimes such as acid attacks against women, as well as other sexual crimes against women, were given some matter of importance in the procedural aspect as well. What was this importance? So section 154 was amended, and if you see section 154, now for specific offenses such as section 326A, 326B, 354, 354A, 354B, 354C, 354D, and 376, including all the various forms of rapes that are committed, 376A provided under these particular sections. For all these sections, the information now was required to be registered by a woman police officer. Now, this was important because many women, after the heinous crime was committed, felt embarrassed as well as ashamed before a male police officer. They were not able to communicate the whole incident. And therefore, the legislature thought it fit that a woman should record the statement instead of a man. Now, you also see that another expression that is used is provided further that. Now, provided further that provides three conditions, A, B, and C. The first condition is that where because of these offenses. Now, one interesting thing is that if you read provided further that and you read subclause A, you will find subclause A, you will find that section 326A and section 326B that relates to acid attack is missing. Now, I think this is a legislative error that has happened and it should have been included, but it's missing. So we can't say anything, but it seems to be a legislative error. Now, why this is important is because in such cases, if the woman is suffering due to temporary or permanent mental or physical disturbed state of mind, if she is in a disturbed state of mind, her statement can be recorded at any place of her convenience, so that she is not bound to come to the police station and get her statement recorded. So the statement can be taken at any convenient place. Second thing is that because the woman is under a state of trauma and traumatized, she won't be able to express herself clearly. Therefore, a special educator as well as an interpreter is allowed. The third thing is that the information has to be videographed. And the fourth thing is that the judicial magistrate under 164 will record her statement. Now, one interesting thing that has happened for these offenses is that any statement that is recorded by the judicial magistrate will be considered as examination in chief during the trial stage. This is important because she then again does not have to appear in the trial stage for examination in chief. Her cross-examination will directly start. But these particular aspects are only for a woman who is disabled physically or mentally, not for other women. Now, this is the scheme of section 154. We have now discussed what is section 154, why registration of FIR is registered, information are not to be registered, why it is not to be registered. We have also discussed that. Now we come to the remedies part. Now there are two types of remedies that are provided under section, under various sections of CRPC. Now the first one is a executive remedy. Executive remedy is provided under section 154, subclause 3. wherein a person's FIR, if not registered, he can go to the superintendent of police and complain him about his non-registration of the FIR. And if the superintendent of police so feels that yes, the facts disclosed in the information are cognizable in nature, he will investigate himself or will depute a subordinate police officer to investigate the crime. So this is one form of remedy which is executive in nature, because the superintendent of police is there in picture. The judiciary is not yet brought into the picture. The second thing is about judicial remedies. Now there are three forms of judicial remedies that are available, but that has to happen in a process. First is section 156 subclause 3, which empowers the magistrate, and you can make a complaint to the magistrate under section 156.3 stating that your FIR is not registered, and the magistrate may direct for registration of an FIR. That is 156.3. Now 156.3 has been interpreted by the courts, and the court have held that magistrate has all powers which are required for proper investigation of the offense. Then we come to the second section, that is section 200 of CRPC, wherein you can make a complaint to the magistrate for registration and to the session court. The third thing is High Court. Now supposedly you make a complaint under section 156.3 for registration of the FIR, and that is not registered. What remedy will you have against that? You can go under section 482. There are few cases where people have also gone under 226 and 227, but the courts have not entertained it, saying that the remedy that is provided under section 154 subclause 3 as well as section 200, and if not any of the two, then under section 482 is self-sufficient, and hence applying the rule of availability of an efficacious alternative remedy, the court doesn't entertain a writ under 226 or 227 nowadays. And the Supreme Court also in the later judgments have criticized this practice. So that is the legislative remedies that are provided as per the statute. This is the end of the scheme of the statute. And now we will come to the second part, that is regarding the case laws that are on this subject. So is Ajay joining, my colleague?
We're just checking, sir, 1 second.
Anyways, we can proceed. So let's understand why few informations are not considered as FIR, and they are not required to be registered by a police officer if they are cryptic in nature. Now there are two important cases that will come to your mind. First one is Tapinder Singh versus State of Punjab. I'll dictate the citation as well. It's 1972 SCC 113. Now a very interesting fact happened in this case. A police officer received information regarding a commission of a cognizable offense by a person. The police officer went there, recorded the statement of the deceased as well as his brother. Now both of them subsequently died. Now the question was, and this was not raised in the district court or the high court, it was raised for the first time in the Supreme Court. Now the question that was raised is that the first information report was given to the police officer by a stranger, and this information that is given by the deceased as a dying declaration, as you may call it, the FIR becomes a dying declaration when the person is no more, and also the statement of his brother can at best be considered as statements made during investigation, and hence is barred by section 162. Now the court was caught with a problem, because what will be considered as the first information report? The information by the stranger or the information given by the deceased, giving complete details about how the thing happened? Now the court said that as a general rule, by the usage of the term first information report, it seems that the information that is given for the first time to the police officer is first information report. But that is not the case. The court said that a cryptic or an oral message that is given to the police officer is not a first information report. For the simple reason that the intention there is not to register it as an FIR, but it is to take the help of the police officers to control the crime. The second thing that the court said is that if you want to understand whether a particular information that is given to the police is an FIR or not, you have to see whether it discloses the commission of a cognizable offense. Moreover, further details can be seen, such as the name of the accused, the facts that took place, and various other things that are usually recorded in detail in the FIR. These things have to be seen to understand whether the information qualifies as a first information or not. Now, second case is far more interesting. That is the Jessica Lal murder case, which is also known as Manu Sharma versus State, NCT of Delhi. Now, this is another interesting case because the legal argument was raised very similar to Tapinder Singh's case. What happened is that when Jessica Lal was shot, there were 3 telephonic conversations that happened between the police officer and a stranger. He told him that a murder has taken place. This person has shot. Then the name of the person was actually not disclosed. It was later when the police reached the hospital that they recorded the statement of Shyam Munshi. He was a person who had seen the commission of the offense. Now, he gave an elaborate detail of all the things that happened during that period when she was shot. Now, again, the question was raised that the 3 telephonic conversations that were made earlier should be treated as an FIR. The court said that no. Telephonic conversations are different from an information given to the police officer in the police station. The court kept it under 2 pedestrian, but it doesn't mean that telephonic conversation cannot be recorded as an FIR. It can be. You can dictate your complaint on phone to a police officer, and if he records it, gets your signature, gives you a copy, it is an FIR. There is no problem with that. But where it is an oral communication made to the police officer with no intention of getting it registered as an FIR, then it is not an FIR. Now, you would appreciate why few information that is given to the police officer is not considered an FIR. Now, let's come to the second topic. That is the registration of the FIR. Now, if you see, the word shall has been used under section 154. Now, this word shall, if you read with the other sections in CRPC, such as section 41, 42, 45, you will notice that the legislature there has used the word may as far as investigation by the police officer is required to be done. So there is a discretion with the police officer to investigate the matter or not. But the word shall has been specifically used under section 154. Now, the usage, the difference in usage of these 2 provisions clearly establishes that registration of FIR is mandatory. One another interesting point, that this word shall that now appears in this CRPC for registration of FIR has been consistent since time immemorial. Means from the first CRPC that was enacted till now, the word shall has been there. So registration of FIR is mandatory. And that is what the Supreme Court in Lalita Kumari versus Government of Uttar Pradesh in the year 2014, the citation is 2014 to SCC 1, said. Now, this is an important case because the court considered the legislative history, the court considered the reasons offered by various state governments why registration of FIR is mandatory. Some argued that it is not mandatory, it is directory, and a police officer has a choice to do a preliminary inquiry before registering an FIR. All this thing was argued before the court. The court pointed out 3 things, and those are crystal clear now. Number 1, registration of FIR is mandatory if it discloses commission of a cognizable offense. Number two, that the police is not a person to decide the credibility or the correctness, trustworthiness, truthness of the information that is given to the police officer. He has to register it. Number three, preliminary inquiry question comes into picture only when the police officer is not able to determine whether the offenses that have been alleged or whether the facts that have been alleged shows the commission of a cognizable case. If it is not able to show a commission of a cognizable case and it shows non-cognizable cases, in such case the police officer cannot take cognizance, and he can very well do a preliminary inquiry to appreciate whether he should take cognizance or not. Another important thing is that supposedly there is one cognizable offense that is committed and there are 5 non-cognizable offenses that they are committed. So what will be the scenario then? Will the magistrate take cognizance on it, or will the police officer take cognizance on it? The answer is the police officer will take cognizance on it, because one of the offenses that have been complained is a cognizable offense. So the police officer has to take cognizance of the same. This is the landmark judgment of Lalita Kumari and has been used down the line by various Supreme Court, other judgments by the Honorable Supreme Court. Now we come to the another aspect, that is under which cases the police is empowered to conduct a preliminary inquiry, to be honest, or investigation before registering an FIR. And these are specific heads that is given by the Supreme Court, and these are only the cases in which the police officer can say that I am not going to register the FIR till I do a preliminary inquiry. Those are matrimonial disputes, commercial offenses, medical negligence cases, and corruption cases. Now the reasons are twofold. Number one, few statutes provide for permission to be taken, or it provides for a preliminary inquiry to be conducted by the police. That is one reason why the police has to conduct a preliminary inquiry before registration of the FIR. Number two is that specifically, for example, medical negligence cases, if a doctor is arrested left, right, and center, how will the institution of providing medical help work in this country? So this is precisely few of the reasons why such type of offenses have been excluded from the mandatory registration of the FIR, and the police has been given a discretion to decide whether it wants to register an FIR or not after conducting a preliminary inquiry. Now we come to section 156 subclause 3. Now this is also very important, because this is, as you recall, is the section under which the magistrate directs the police officer to register the FIR or investigate the offense. Now the ambit of this power was first considered in the case of Vasu versus State of Uttar Pradesh. Now in this case, the court said that under 156 subclause 3, a magistrate has all the powers that are required for investigation of a particular offense. Means he can exercise all powers to direct a proper investigation. A magistrate cannot investigate himself. He can only direct the police officers. But he can use that power to point out or to give any directions that he feels will be required to conduct a proper investigation. That's point number one. Point number two is, supposedly you file a petition under section 156(3), and then the magistrate gives a direction for investigation, but fails to give a direction for registration of the FIR. What will be the scenario then? Because the police can very well say that the magistrate has not given any direction for registration of the FIR, so I'm not going to register an FIR. That can't be the case. If the magistrate has directed under section 156(3) for investigation, it automatically means that he has also directed for registration of an FIR, because as you know, an investigation, the inception of investigation is from FIR itself. So this is the whole gambit of section 156(3) that was given by the Supreme Court. Now we come to another case as to when can the magistrate use section 156 subclause 3. Now this position has changed a little. Earlier the position was that power under 156(3) can be used by the magistrate before taking cognizance. Means if he has taken cognizance, he cannot use the mechanism that is provided under section 156(3). The specific case in this regard was Madhav and others versus State of Maharashtra of the year 2013. Now I'll dictate the citation: 2013 5 SCC 615. Now in this case, the court said that the magistrate can resort to 156 subclause 3 only before he takes cognizance. He cannot resort to this provision after taking cognizance. But recently there is a judgment by Justice Rohinton in Vinoba Bhai, Hari Bhai and others versus State of Gujarat, where the court has said, and now it is clear, that 156 subclause 3 can be used not only before a cognizance has been taken by the magistrate, but also in cases where the magistrate has taken cognizance. Means even after taking cognizance, he can direct the police officer to further investigate this. This is a drastic change, because earlier there were two lines of judgment, and if you read the judgment in detail, this particular judgment by Justice Rohinton, you will see that there were two lines of judgments on this, and many judgments were direct on the point that after cognizance, resort to 156 subclause 3 cannot be taken by the magistrate. There were only a very few handful of judgments which said that no, even after 156(3) even after taking cognizance, 156(3) can be relied. There were very few judgments on this point. But still, Justice Rohinton, interpreting the section as well as the scheme of CRPC, stated that why shouldn't investigation be fair? Because a fair investigation will guarantee a right that is promised to every citizen under Article 21, number one. Number two, that there is no such restriction provided by the legislature under CRPC in express terms. This is something that was created by judicial decisions and on the interpretation of the section. And therefore, in order to do complete justice and to provide for an investigation that serves the purpose of justice, it is relevant that the magistrate should have the power to direct for investigation under section 156 subclause 3 even after cognizance is taken. Now we come to few practical aspects that you should keep in mind when you are filing a complaint under section 156 subclause 3. The first being that when you file a complaint under 156 subclause 3, it has to be supported by an affidavit. Now this was made mandatory by the court in Priyanka Srivastav and others versus State of Uttar Pradesh. I'll dictate the citation. It's 2015 6 SCC 287. Now in this case, the court pointed out that an affidavit by the complainant whose FIR has not been registered and he seeks permission for investigation, proper investigation or registration of a FIR, should give it the facts as well as the problem that he faced on an affidavit, so that later, if it turns out to be false, he can be punished. Now this is something that is very important. Now you will also notice that a situation may arise that a FIR is lodged, or a situation may arise that a complaint is made under section 156(3) for non-registration of an FIR and it is dismissed. Thereafter, a fresh FIR on the same cause of action is again registered. Now the question will arise, when the same has been dismissed once, can a subsequent FIR or second FIR be registered? This position in Mahedri and others versus State of Uttar Pradesh, when the court points out that registration of FIR can be done even after a complaint for its non-registration was filed before the magistrate under section 156(3) and it was dismissed. So this is the crux of the whole scenario and legal position that still exists in India regarding the registration of an FIR. But there is one more thing that I must point out, that why is the police officer reluctant to register an FIR? One of the reasons may be because of the pressure that is created by media, because of the reports that are published in the newspapers showing the number of cases that happen in every state, and because of the criticism that is made to the government for not being able to control the crime. Now, we should understand one thing, that it may happen, and there was an interview by a very renowned IPS officer saying that few states in which the number of FIRs lodged are less is because they don't bother to register an FIR. So what I feel is that now the time has come that a particular amendment should be made to section 154, and a separate body should be made in this regard, which will be independent of the police station. They will register the complaint. They will follow all the procedure that is provided under section 154. And after following the procedure, they will give a copy of this complaint to the respective police station, and the police station can continue with the investigation of the same under section 157. This is my suggestion, because even after Lalita Kumari, it has been seen that many times FIRs are not registered. One of the newspapers suggested that out of 10 FIRs, that out of 10 information that is given to the police, out of that 5 are not registered as an FIR. So there is a problem, and the problem is quite big. Therefore, I have come out with this suggestion, and I hope the legislature in future acts upon it. There's another thing that comes to my mind, and that is that there should be amendment made to section 154 so that the provision that is provided for taking the statement of the victim at any place convenient or at his house should also be extended to acid attack victims. I don't know how the legislature committed this mistake, but they have. And it's quite strange why it is not yet rectified. So that is my second suggestion. And that's it. My session comes to an end now, as far as one-way deliberation is concerned.
Okay, sir, thanks a lot. That was really insightful. Now we have some questions with us that I'll be putting forth. So the first question is that in the cases that we are discussing regarding section 156 subclause 3 of CRPC, when police refuses to lodge an FIR, can police be held personally liable?
Yes, absolutely. So there's a provision under the IPC, I think it's section 166A, that for few offenses, if the police officer does not register an FIR, he will be criminally liable, and there's punishment, I think, also provided of 6 months to the police officer, so far as I can recollect. It's section 166A of IPC.
Okay, thanks for that. Now the next question is that, is the complaint under section 190 of CRPC mandatory with the application under section 156 3 CRPC seeking registration of FIR?
So see, there is a difference. In what happens is that 156, if you see, subclause 3 only says that any magistrate empowered under section 199 may order such an investigation as above mentioned. Now, the thing is here that any magistrate who is empowered under section 190 can direct the police officer. That is the only relevance that is made to section 190. And apart from that, there's nothing else. You have to file a complaint under section 156 subclause 3 for registration of an FIR, if the police so denies from registering it.
Okay. So the third question is that what happens in case of a cognizable offense where the victim comes to register an FIR at a much belated stage? Say in a case of offense alleged to be committed, the punishment for
I
which
didn't
is
hear you
less.
properly. Can you come again? I'm so sorry.
No, no, it's okay. So the question is that what happens in case of a cognizable offense where the victim comes to register an
Yeah.
FIR at a much belated stage?
Mhm.
In a case of
Right.
offense alleged to be committed where the punishment is less than 7 years, can the police say no
Right.
to lodging an FIR in that case?
So see, the issue has now been resolved by the court. The court has clearly said that registration of FIR is mandatory. However, the court has given the police to hold a preliminary inquiry in cases wherein there is an abnormal delay in latches. So if there's an abnormal delay in latches, which is over for say 3 months in reporting a particular commission of offense, and there is no explanation for the same, the police officer can conduct a preliminary inquiry. I think I've answered that.
Okay. The other question is that is the limitation under section 468 of CRPC also a bar for police
Mhm.
under section 154 CRPC?
See, then the point again comes to my mind. I think for the major offenses, there's no such limitation. You will appreciate this thing in context of section 376. Supposedly a rape is committed on a woman by a very close relative. She'll be reluctant to even admit it. And therefore, there may be a huge delay. And I think that is not addressed by the other sections. They are only for few offenses wherein a particular period of limitation is provided. Apart from that, in most of the offenses, even if it is a delayed state, if the reasons are explanatory, the police has to register an FIR. And if it doesn't, they can go under section 156 sub clause 3 for its registration.
Okay, sir, thanks. Now, the other question is that the guidelines that have been produced by the Honorable Apex Court in the case of Sakri Vasu versus State of UP, 2008 to
Right,
SCP 409, are they sufficient
right.
for these cases that we are covering right now?
Yeah, that's quite a good question. So I'll tell you, because section 156(3) subclause 3 has been elaborately written in this particular judgment, but there are few loopholes that I find. The first loophole is that the court is not very clear. This judgment is just a precedent in a limited context. That is that even if the magistrate has not specifically asked the police officer to register an FIR, he has to register. But as to what type of directions can be given by the magistrate under section 156 subclause 3, that I think required a further elaboration by the court. Because even now, even the court says that any direction can be given which is required to do a complete investigation. Still, what type of directions? That creates confusion. Therefore, I think that next time, whenever judgment comes under the interpretation of section 156 subclause 3, illustration should be provided by the court in order to help the lower judiciary as well as the lawyers to understand what are the directions covered under section 156 subclause 3. I think I've answered that.
Okay, sir. Now, the other question is that in a case where the complainant has filed a 156(3) application and is pending hearing, and in meanwhile
Right.
there is a compromise done by the police between the parties, or the police registers an FIR, what should the complainant do in the court where he has filed 156(3)?
So see, point is straightforward that so there are two types of offenses. That one, so when I now as I understand your question is that if 156(3) is pending, he can very well withdraw it if he wants to. But if the FIR is registered and there was a 156(3) filed for further investigation, and now the question comes whether that particular FIR, what will be the effect on that particular FIR if they have entered into a compromise? The answer to this is that there are two types of offenses. There are three types of offenses, to be honest: compoundable, non-compoundable, and compoundable with the permission of the court. So as far as compoundable and compoundable with the permission of the court is concerned, that can be very well done away with. the court can take cognizance of the same at a later state, or you can go under section 482 of CRPC before the High Court and submit a compromise that has taken place between the parties, and the court will quash under 482. Such type of cases have happened where husband and wife have registered multiple FIRs against each other, and now the court wants to end the mess and want to clear it and give them a fresh slate to start their life. The court has has quashed FIRs under 482 when a compromise has been reached.
Okay. So
but the FIR will remain. FIR will be remain until and unless it is not quashed. That's there.
Okay. The next question is that if the accused is out of the territorial jurisdiction of the court, then is it mandatory to follow 202 CRPC for the judge? It will delay the process. Is there a remedy for the complainant?
Now, see, as far as 202, I don't think so. You need to go even to 202 if he is out from the jurisdiction of that particular place. What you can do is that you can file an FIR before a police officer. That will be considered as a zero FIR. That particular zero FIR, if a police officer wants, he can investigate it. If he doesn't, he can forward that particular zero FIR to a police station wherein they have jurisdiction. And the jurisdiction of a police station is coterminous with the jurisdiction of a magistrate. So there the number will be registered. This is precisely the reason it is known as zero FIR, because no number is given on such FIR. And it is at a later point of time when that particular information reaches a police station of a particular jurisdiction or having a jurisdiction, that a number is given to such particular FIRs.
Okay. Okay. The other question is that can a 156(3) be filed if police does not accept the complaint and the complainant has no proof that police is not accepting the complaint? There are two parts to this question. So the second part says that if the police has accepted the complaint and given a receiving, after how many days should one file a 156(3) application?
Now see, the point is clear in this regard, and that is why I think that there are various legislative safeguards that are provided. Now, as to the first part of the question, if the police officer keeps the complaint to himself, does not registers it, meaning thereby he has just kept the complaint. There is no FIR as such. Number one. Number two, that is precisely the reason as a safeguard, Section 154 provides for giving a copy of the FIR to the particular complainant or the victim, as the case may be. Now, if that copy is not given, Section 154 is not complied with. And hence, it will be deemed that there is no registration of FIR. So you can proceed under Section 156 subclause 3, because as soon as you give information and if it discloses a cognizable offense, the police officer is due. I think the second question was where he refuses to register. In that case, they can easily go to Section 156 subclause 3.
Okay. And the next question is that what is the difference between a Section 156(3) CRPC application and Section 200 CRPC application?
Now see, 156 subclause 3 application, the magistrate there does not take cognizance, though he has to apply judicial mind according to, I think it was Ramdev judgment, where the court said that the magistrate has to apply mind to the limited extent of seeing whether the information discloses a cognizable offense or not. But he does not take cognizance under 156(3). Whereas in the letter, the magistrate does take cognizance. And it is only thereafter that he proceeds to Section 200 steps involved. He has to process to the complainant. If he, process to the accused. If he feels that the complaint that is made and after the witnesses as well as the victim is examined on oath does not show commission of offense, that he can ask the police officer to hold an inquiry. In this inquiry, the police won't have the power to arrest. And after that, the judge can issue a process to the accused if satisfied that yes, offense has taken place. So that is the limited difference between Section 200 and 156(3). One, cognizance is not taken under 163. It is a pre-cognizance state. And two, under section 200, cognizance is taken, witnesses are examined, and it is only thereafter that the magistrate, if he thinks that investigation is required, can ask the police officer to hold an inquiry into the same. I think I've answered that.
Connected with the same issue, there's another question. It says that in case complainant does not have the evidence and the evidence is with the accused, what is the remedy available with the complainant? Should he file a 156(3) or a 200 complaint?
Now see, point is that if you are going to register an FIR, you are not required to leave the evidence along with the FIR at that stage. It is just an information that you have to give to them. And as soon as you give the information, the police will initiate the action. The police has the power to, during investigation, to seize the documents, to hold the documents, and other powers of investigation that are provided under section 157, 158 to 164, I guess. So the police can very well do the job at that time. So I don't think so there's a requirement that if he has no evidence against him, he can't register an FIR. That's not the case.
Okay, okay. So the last question that we have is that is an order under section 156(3) an interlocutory order? If yes, then can the complainant go in revision if the magistrate rejects his application under 156(3) and vice versa? If there is direction of registration of
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah.
Should I repeat the
voice was
question
low.
again?
Yeah, please, if you can.
Yeah. So this question says it is an order under section 156(3) an interlocutory order. If yes, then can the complainant go in revision if the magistrate rejects his application under 156(3) and vice versa? If there is direction of registration of FIR, can the accused go in revision jurisdiction?
So see, the court in various cases wherein the magistrate has rejected the registration of an FIR or further investigation under 156(3), they have applied for the remedy that is provided under 227 of the Constitution, read with 226. So that's there. They can go, and the court can very well decide whether the order of the magistrate is bad or not. So that can be done. That's okay.
Okay. So thank you, Mr. Vikram. That was really helpful and insightful. In the end, you would like to add something?
Yeah, the two recommendations that I made, I think should be taken seriously by the legislature. Number one is to establish an independent body, which will be independent of the police station, which will register the FIR and then forward it to the concerned police station for investigation. That's recommendation number one. Number two is that the legislature should add acid attack cases in the provided further clauses that it has provided under section 154, specifically section 154A. It should add that so that the confusion is clear and justice can be served. That's the limited thing. And thank you so much for having me here. It was a pleasure addressing to the audience through this platform. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for being here. It was wonderful to have you here as well. And stay safe, everyone. I would like to thank the attendees also. And for the recording, kindly subscribe to LegitQuest YouTube channel. Thank you.
Thank you.